Evening everyone, hello. We should be fine on the bit rate because I've got the fibre installed and it seems to be working quite well. Although, as I was saying to the people on Wednesday, it's all very weird because, you know, I thought, well, with having proper broadband at last, I should be able to up the bit rate of the stream. So I did everything, test the bandwidth before. I said, oh yeah, no problem at all. So you set everything up and then you just go live and it says, oh, by the way, we've reduced your bit rate to what it used to be. Why? Never mind. So we've already had lots of things coming in here, but I like to start off with something so that I can have it somehow related to the thumbnail at the beginning with. And someone has actually asked, are we going to be discussing bullying again in the comments there? He's like, yeah, we are. At least for a little bit. Actually, it just seems to me there's going to be like a scandal a week with the cabinet. We're going round the cabinet just going about how unsuitable they are for their role. So the Sweller Braverman, you know, quite apart from the politics, Sweller Braverman had to resign for being a threat to national security. And then she was reappointed 6 days later, despite the fact that the 6 days later we came to learn she was even a greater threat to national security than we first thought. She's an incredibly weak link. And then we had Gavin Williamson just last week. We were talking about Gavin Williamson. We were starting to see some of the details of the incredibly childish threats, but more sinister threats emerged as well. He's gone. He's gone. Now it's Dominic Raab. What's tonight's discussion? Dominic Raab. Dominic Raab apparently was very abusive towards civil servants when, under Boris Johnson, he was the Secretary of State for the Justice Department. So what's happened is Rishi Sunak has, of course, reappointed Dominic Raab to that position, which is Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister doesn't matter. That's a party matter, got nothing to do with the government as such. But it's apparently over a dozen senior civil servants within the department. When Dominic Raab was reappointed, they had to be brought into a meeting to tell them Dominic's coming back, but you don't have to work with him. And you think to yourself, so for senior civil servants to be told they can actually have a choice, they can choose to remain in the department or they will be helped to move to a different department. You think, how bad was he? How bad? And so we are going to be finding some more things are about to emerge. These stories about Dominic Raab have only emerged in the last 24 hours as far as I can tell. So we're going to start seeing more. But already we've got stories of him throwing food at people. So again, it's like Gavin Williamson, isn't it? They're like men children. It's so upset. It's not just like rude or dismissive in a way that maybe belies a lack of empathy, you know, but actually if you physically throw something at someone, I mean, that's assault, isn't it? And how, I mean, to have a senior member of the government have such little emotional control that under any circumstances with officials, we're not talking about, you know, a bust up across a negotiating table trying to end a war or something. You know, we're talking about his own staff who are maybe just contradicting some of his stupid ideas when he's coming out with these crazy ideas. They're probably just saying, Minister, you know, this isn't realistic. And it might be as simple as that. And he's throwing food at them. So I'm thinking to myself, look, you know, we've got the budget statement on Thursday. So what's happened, right? If we think about Rishi Sunak's government. So he had his first PMQs the day after. It was fine. There was nothing really wrong with it. Obviously, Starmer had plenty of things to go at because Rishi Sunak is not an unknown quantity. Unlike with Liz Truss, I would say Liz Truss's first PMQs went better than Rishi Sunak's, because for Rishi Sunak, you know, he was the champion. There was plenty that Labour could use against him in terms of his personal tax fiddles, his wife's tax fiddles, and well, not tax fiddles actually, but dubious business arrangements, shall we say, and his own performance as Chancellor. But nonetheless, as a PMQs goes, it was fine for him. Then the next one, Swallow Braverman had blown up. The next one was Gavin Williamson. Is the next one going to be Dominic Raab? Are we going to, over the next few days, hear even more tales of woe about Dominic Raab? And then you think to yourself, who's briefing this? Why is this coming out? If Dominic Raab was so, and maybe it did, or did I miss it? You know, if Dominic Raab was so abusive, if he was such a bully, you think, how did it not come out before? Why is it only coming out now? You know, why did we have the Gavin Williamson thing? Obviously must have been opponents of Rishi Sunak, maybe opponents of Gavin Williamson. I mean, I'm not denying that there will be people who genuinely didn't want Gavin Williamson in place, but you know, you think, so then the thing with Dominic Raab, who's leaked that? Who's left that to the papers? It's really weird. I wonder how Alistair Campbell's record would hold up of allegations of bullying. Alistair Campbell was just a spin doctor. Now, if you're going to talk about former Labour whips and chief whips, then absolutely, you know, the sort of things we've heard of from Gavin Williamson as in his role of chief whip, you know, make no mistake, the behaviour like that sort of went on across different parties. It's the way it was done, you know. But the thing is, they may not get away with it anymore, because they always got away with it because it was all secret. You sort of occasionally, usually years after these politicians had passed on, as in left office, not died, you might hear of some stories, but generally speaking, you know, there wasn't going to be any outing of them while they were still in post. Whereas now, you sort of get the feel that if a chief whip fancies taking part in like physical intimidation or threatening or blackmail or anything like that, you sort of feel they might be on very shaky ground because they could be outed while they're still in office. But yeah, there's no suggestion on this one that it's only Conservative whips that have been beyond the pale in their time. Labour ones as well. It'll apply to other parties too, but with Labour and the Conservatives being the parties of government, it's always more important for the government whips to make sure the legislation passes through. These people have no intellectual gravitas, they resort to bullying, having a tantrum. I mean, even clever people can engage in bullying. But what we've got here are people who are just, it doesn't do them any good, useless. You know, they can't even claim to be like, I mean, like Gordon Ramsay's behaviour in the kitchen isn't really good. But at least he gets like the results out of it. These people are idiots, they don't even get results. His predecessor quietly settled the barrister strike, and now there's a fear amongst barristers that Raab will try and settle it. He can't. No, they played an absolute blinder there. So the predecessor, it was Stephen Barclay, wasn't it? Do you know what? I mean, I pay attention to British politics quite a lot, and I often cannot even keep up. I don't know what's going on. We've had such a revolving door to the cabinet. It's been insane. I don't think there can ever have been a year like this in British politics, with so many cabinet, not just junior ministers, cabinet ministers being in post for less than a month. It's ridiculous. But yes, I think it was Stephen Barclay who was the previous Justice Secretary, and he concluded a deal with barristers. But the Criminal Bar Association, who represents the barristers, they put it to a vote really quickly. So as far as I'm concerned, it's all done and dusted. So Raab can't go back on it. It's all signed, sealed and delivered as far as I am aware. And as I say, that's because the Criminal Bar Association acted very quickly. As soon as Raab was gone, you know, and obviously it was in Truss's interest as well. It's in any Prime Minister's interest to end a strike. It's not a good, even if you think you can try and use it to generate a few distraction headlines, the hit to the economy is really bad. And you are going to pay for it later on. And the same will apply to Sunak. You know, I noticed, I haven't seen any updates yet, but You know, obviously it looks like we are going to we may avert the need for much wider spread industrial action. We're still going to keep getting industrial action, but it sounds like the government may want to actually deal with it properly instead of letting it drag on, because you let it drag on and it hurts the economy, and then you get hit then. You know, the Tories' long-term plan has to be, I don't know what the long-term plan is, but it has to be, they know they're heading into a recession. They know we're basically already there. Surely for the next election, they need to be able to show growth. They have to fall back on the usual thing of, yes, we had the tough times, but I steered us through it. Master helmsman here. We steered our way through the choppy waters, and now we've got clear sailing and a golden harbour up ahead. Just vote for us again and you'll see all the wonders of the new world. And that plan is in serious jeopardy if they extend if they either deepen the recession or extend the length of time the recession, the economy is contracting, and strike action's not helping them. But anyway, oh, hang on, there's a Raab related one here. I did see this, Anthony. Yeah, did I see the video of Raab mouthing wanker at Starmer in this week's PMQs? I didn't actually see it at the time I was watching it myself, but I did see the clip later. Yes. This was, ironically, this was when Starmer was banging, well, all of his questions, I suppose, were banging on about bullying. But, you know, he was accusing Rishi Sunak, I think it was the bit where he was accusing him of being too weak to stand up to the bullies or something. Raab mouth wanker. Oh, dear. Yes. But anyway. Is Sunak away at the G20 next week? 16 to 18. Wouldn't that mean be doing... Raab doing PMQs. I don't know exactly when Sunak is out of the country. I mean, it's a big week for him next week because there's the budget statement as well. Sunak is surely going to want to be in the chamber for that. So I don't know exactly when Sunak. So I think it'll just be a quick visit there. But I don't actually know. We'll have to find out. But yeah. If Sunak isn't about for it, then yes, Raab will be doing it, which means that Rayner will be up against him again. Raab does strike me as someone with uncontrollable rages. I saw Bunter start to go into one on a Kunzberg interview for a second, then it was edited out and the red face went instantly. BBC cover up, yeah. Well, I mean, editing does happen as well, to be fair. And I will say it doesn't necessarily do you any favours not to edit something like that out. Even if you weren't being interviewed by someone trying to give you an easy time. But yeah, well, the problem is with these people is they can't, I always say to people, if you can't let your views be challenged, then your views are worthless. These are people that their views are worthless because they absolutely hate it, the temerity of someone, particularly if it's someone they see as beneath them. You remember this privately educated attitude. They can't, you know, there's in them, you know, I mean, we do have in any society there's a sort of hierarchy, you know, but this sort of finely balanced, well, not even balanced, but class hierarchy in Britain, which the people at the top of it are much more keenly aware of, ironically, and they hate it to see someone who they think is like lower caste than them, you know, challenging them. They really hate it. They can't be dealing with it, and they don't know how. They haven't, as you say, they haven't got the intellectual rigor to challenge back because they don't even think about their own ideas. They just say things, and that is it, as if they're God. They just pronounce, let there be light, and that's all there is to it. I have to remember where we live in the smartphone age now. Far easier to get screenshots of bullying to get leaked from personal phones that it was off government computers. Everyone has a camera now. Yes, I often wonder about that. If people who, like, you know, you'll see people being abusive on the tube or in the street or something like that, seemingly oblivious to the fact that there's can be plenty of recorded evidence of it from passers-by. An economist in New Statement said the government policy had lurched from far too loose a fiscal policy with the tax cuts to the rich, to too tight on fiscal monetary, just as we go into recession. I mean, until the budget statement is announced, we don't know exactly what they're planning, but we are getting plenty. There's lots of reports about it in the newspapers that are very close to the Conservatives. And it's, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if whenever we see reports of, oh, they're thinking of doing this or they think they're doing that, it's not necessarily like a leak in the normal sense. It's probably coming directly from the Prime Minister or the Chancellor, almost as a way of testing the waters, as much with their own MPs as the public, because they have got, I think, a very, very tricky tightrope to walk here. It is, but I mean, ultimately, what does seem clear is they have the attitude that they must close this deficit, and you don't have to. You know, in fact, it's understood in a recession you wouldn't. Other countries wouldn't. Why would they? You know, you can have a deficit. Right, actually, Darren, I'm going to pick on your question then, because I heard something, but I don't know what it is. So you're going to have to now tell me. It says here, should Wes Streeting face any consequences? So something's obviously happened, which I'm oblivious to. So you'll need to actually tell me what happened. Because I saw someone say something earlier today on social media, on Twitter, I think it was. But I don't know what it was about. And I couldn't find it in the news. So you're going to have to tell me. But I have said several times, I'm not a particular fan of Wes Streeting. A Labour government will have to cope with the hostile media blaming them for the Tory damage. Yeah, Starmer will need popular policies to stop them being a one-term government. What could those policies be? Ultimately, what Labour have to do, and I'm sure it will be their plan, they have to demonstrate to people. Unfortunately, it will require some short-termism as well, but you always get that in a democracy. They'll have to demonstrate rising living standards, ultimately. They need to be able to say to people, are you better off? And the people need to say to them, yes. Now, that is going to need a very clear focus on, again, those target voters. And they can't just wait until the next election. They will have to, put it this way, after 100 days, Keir Starmer, and I'm sure he will, but what he will want to do is after the first 100 days, because I think part of the general election campaign will be not just the manifesto promises, it'll be in the first 100 days we will do this. So what he will need to do after that first 100 days, he will need to address the nation and say, this is what we have done in our first 100 days. And he'll need to rattle off a load of things and say to them, say to the public, have you noticed the difference? And they will need to pick things where people can notice the difference fairly quickly. And Darren's not got back to me yet, so it must be a big one. I know there's like a 60-second delay before you can type again as well. That's unfortunate. I say unfortunate as if I don't do it deliberately. I do, because otherwise it'd be rammed. I have a pen with a tiny camera and USB stick inside, handy to have a call for a meeting. I've never actually gone that far. I've never felt the need to go that far. But yeah, I mean, you know, people really ought to these days behave as if they could be, you know, under surveillance. You know, a dodgy boss could easily have stuff recorded of them, indeed, these days. I still find it incredible sometimes that a politician will say something with a microphone nearby, where they know there's a microphone nearby, they just don't think it's recording or something. It still beggars belief that politicians will do that. And yeah, we're in the age of very easy to covertly record what you are doing and saying. Labour's Wes Streeting apologises for calling Jeremy Corbyn senile in Parliament. Oh, so he's apologised. I was aware of I must have mentioned, I know I talked about it in the stream. It must have been Wednesday's stream then for the members. Yes, I did actually say at the time, Wes Streeting is, he's an idiot in many ways. He's a good communicator, and I don't begrudge him being in the shadow cabinet. I wouldn't want him to be leader, but he is off his head in many ways. He's very divisive, I find. You know, yes, Labour need to move on from Corbyn. Corbyn was stunningly unpopular with the public. And Labour have to make a show of distancing themselves from it. But, you know, you don't, I mean, personal abuse of anyone, I don't really care who it is. I'm not really a fan of personal abuse of anyone, even if the person themselves is quite abusive. So yeah, at the end of the day, if he's apologised for it, good. At least it means he won't do it again. I tell you what it means. What it means is that he's been told that it's not actually the way to go, which is good. You know, the worry is always when you say something and with the intention of, you think it's strategically beneficial to say it, and therefore you carry on saying it. It's a little bit like Keir Starmer's interview last week, where fundamentally he was talking about training more British nurses, but he said we've got too many foreign workers in the NHS, or too many foreign nurses or something. It's like, no. And something like that, saying it in those terms, you just think there's no value in you saying that right now. If you think you're dog whistling to groups, and we know that we need arseholes to vote Labour as well as others, but there's no value in saying that last weekend, because there's no election coming up. So the fact that he said it suggests to me that he might say it again. And what I hope happens, although it's a reflection on the public, not so much the politician, but what I hope happens is that it transpires it was not the right thing to say and he doesn't say it ever again. Does I mean, no, it happens all the time, doesn't it? I'm afraid I didn't see it earlier. There were a lot of comments when I came on already. So I won't have, I may not have seen it. I know there were a lot had popped up before I even started, and I always try and start with a particular topic to begin with. So you'll have to post it again, I'm afraid. I'm all for ending charity status as a public school. If rich people want to spend buckets of cash sending their kids there, why does the school need charitable status? Yeah, of course it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. There are already tax fiddles as it is. I mean, I was making this point to someone on Twitter, and someone else said, you know, how much do the parents of fee-paying children provide for state schools? And the answer can be variable. In theory, of course, someone who is sending their kids to private school because they pay their taxes is also funding state education. But just like someone who's childless, like myself, I haven't got children, but I still pay into the system. But there are fiddles. You know, it's really quite bizarre, the fiddles that people can play to get out of taxes. So you can't do this for the parents apparently, but if the grandparents of kids who go to private school, there's some sort of way of setting up a business such that those kids become beneficiaries of it, and you can use that to offset taxation, and you can basically get out of paying quite a lot of tax. So many tax fiddles in this country. You know, I think I saw someone earlier this week saying, you know, if you really wanted to tackle, you know, the economic issues, the deficit, so to speak, you would just chase up tax avoidance, close down. You can never close down all of it, but, you know, you would at least try and close down tax avoidance schemes. You say, sorry, missed Wednesday stream, that's fine. I look forward to my appearance on Max's Sunday roast tomorrow. Yes, I will remind people. So they actually have, there is the Sunday roast channel, it's on YouTube, the Sunday roast, which Max and Alex do. I think Alex mostly does a lot of the organising for it, of Political X. So I'm on that. I haven't actually watched, they gave me a link to see what I thought about it, but the link doesn't play for me, so I won't get to see it until everyone else gets to see it. They always catch me out as well, because halfway through they did it again. We recorded it. When did we record it? Was it yesterday? No, it can't have been yesterday. Thursday. And they called me out because we're just going on, we're having a chat, and then halfway through they said, oh, should we do the intro? Oh, okay. And I thought this was it, we were going to start. There's no, we'd already recorded. So half of what I said in that thing, I didn't even know we were recording. But anyway. Is it time for the UK and Labour in particular to talk about enacting some Keynesian economic theory combined with taxing the rich policies to get the UK economy on track? In terms of getting the UK economy on track, obviously, what Labour need to focus on, it's the same as any political party needs to focus on, what are the messages that your target voters want to hear? Now, what they then do, just if you rule something out, okay, you can't do that in the next parliament. Well, I mean, you can change your mind, but as soon as you've written the manifesto, it's sort of done. Nothing's set in stone now. There's no policy that Labour have stated now which is set in stone if they think their target voters have changed. But as soon as the manifesto written, it is sort of, unless you're a Tory, in which case you always go back on it anyway. But there is so much scope. People behave as if, there's not. The government are going to behave next week as if there's nothing they can do about it. Well, it's really this simple. We've got this big hole in our budget. We've got to either raise taxes or lower spending. They liken it to someone's household budget. If there's a difference between what your income and your outgoings, you have to close the gap. And you can close the gap by either increasing your income or reducing your outgoings. And for most of us, that means reducing the outgoings, and the Tories play on that because what they want to do is reduce spending. But they also don't mind raising taxes as long as it's on the poor, or at least ordinary people. They tend to prefer it on the poor, though, because ordinary voters are their voters. But there is so much scope for not only greater taxation of the very wealthy, but also just closing down tax avoidance schemes. If someone is supposed to pay, if you look at the income tax bands and you think to yourself that someone who's earning millions is paying that on it, and they're not. Some of them are, many of them are not, because they don't have to. There's always a scheme. And closing those down, and as I say, you can't ever close them down completely. If people have got the money to pay clever accountants, there's always fiddles. But still, I didn't start following politics until Trump's been mind-blowing since. It's talking about exactly how bad Jeremy Corbyn was to attract all this negativity. Others seem more deserving. Right. I mean, there are things genuinely to criticise about him, but ultimately, his main problem was twofold. But it was largely the same problem. He made zero attempt to engage people that he needed for him to win power. He was far too authoritarian. He had his echo chamber and he wouldn't even stick his head out of it. The second problem was that he wouldn't even get a good strategy team around him, because he was much more interested in getting people. He was far more focused on policy than strategy. So he wanted his strategy team to be people who agreed with his policy aims. But that's completely irrelevant. Like, if you need medical attention, you go to the doctor, you don't ask what their political views are, because it doesn't matter, they'll still do their job. If you go to the greengrocer, you want like 6 apples, you don't ask them what their politics are, you just buy the apples. And it's the same even for a political strategy team. Doesn't matter what their views are. Can you win us the election? That should be it, and they should have paid the best, and they didn't. So ultimately what happened was that the right-wing press would savage Corbyn, as they do for any Labour leader. But whereas other Labour leaders will then offer a rebuttal, he didn't engage, refused, wouldn't do it. So therefore, people see the articles about him, and then they see nothing countering it. Nothing, because they're not going to read the Morning Star or the Canary. So they saw nothing countering it at all. So it became truth. And some of it is, but a lot of it isn't. And if you compare, I mean, I could go back over what previous Labour leaders have done, but you can look at the current one. Keir Starmer writes articles for the Guardian, sure, but he'll also write them for the Daily Mail. He'll write them for I don't know if the Express have ever published one, but he'll write them for the Times, for the Telegraph. If anyone says something, if anyone publishes an article trying to say something, he'll bring it up. He'll take it head on. Because what you don't want to do, sorry, I'm missing a load of comments here, is you don't want to let it sort of fester. Right, I'm going to skip quite a lot ahead. I'm going to miss some things out. I'm sorry. Oh, what are the members' live streams? Didn't get a notification. So, all right, there's 2 classes of members. When I say members, I mean the upper tier of members, for which there's a different stream each week as well. Same in Japan with the tax on schools. Someone told us that when our kid was going to start kindergarten, couldn't believe it, didn't know it was allowed in the UK too. Yeah, it's a madness. I mean, they could. There's one of these right-wing commentators saying, "Oh, if you remove charity status, all the private schools will fold," and it's like, yeah, promises. It's not true. Private schools have existed, I said, for centuries before state-funded education came into being. Just right, so I don't know if it's already been discussed. How is it possible that Sunak didn't know leaving the single market customs union would harm the economy? He's supposed to be an expert in the field. He's a banker. He's not, and he wasn't a banker of many decades experience either. He was one of those city bankers who works very long hours. They work incredibly long hours, but for a very small number of years. They become incredibly rich. They know they've got probably about 5 to 10 years before their body collapses under the strain of 20-hour days, hard living, and so they just rake it in as quickly as they can. And I mean, bear in mind, he's younger than I am. What is he, about 42 or something? Rishi Sunak he turned 30, I think I'm right in saying this, the day after the Tories came into power. So technically, when this Conservative government that he is in charge of now came into power, he was technically in his 20s. He wasn't an MP at the time. He became an MP in 2015. So he would have been about 35 when he became an MP. And yeah, you're saying he's 42, so he must be, yeah. So about 42. So he wasn't in banking for that long. You know, we're not talking about someone with lots and lots of experience. So when we talk about him knowing his stuff, he knows his stuff in terms of, you know, how to make money on the markets. That doesn't necessarily make him an expert. Rather more expertise than Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng had, arguably, yes. Because he'll know how the markets think, he'll know how market traders think, because he was one. But that, as I say, that doesn't make him an economics expert. Chartered accountant told me they love Labour governments and professionals, more tax codes and wriggle room. Is also a Labour supporter. I don't know about that. I'm not a chartered accountant. But you do need to close down tax avoidance. And this idea that people just bugger off out of the country, will they out? Will they out? They don't bugger off out of countries where they do pay more tax, do they? It makes me so mad when the media say another wave of austerities if it ever went away. Yes. Yeah, I mean, the way they'll treat, the way the government will defend austerity having not always been in place, because they say, well, there weren't public spending cuts every single year. It's like, well, there sort of were in real terms. But the government, to be fair, governments rarely deal in real terms unless they're doing well. What is this? Have I missed another one? Not sure. If private schools are paying tax, expect a drop of private school enrolment from 7 to 6, isn't it 8 or something? Can't remember. If you ban them, expect Swiss private schools to do well. I really don't care if they want to go elsewhere for their private education. That's fine by me. I would settle for just the likes of Eton disappearing up its own arsehole, because they just keep providing us with useless prime minister after use. I'm not saying they've all been useless, you know, because you can get clever people go to Eton as well. It's just that Eton doesn't exist to turn your child into an intelligent, productive member of society. It is intended to turn your child into a future leader whether they are fit for it or not. Some of them are fit for it, but that seems to be entirely coincidental. Patrick Minford's an economist. Being clever doesn't stop you being stupid. Well, no, indeed. Sunak helped cause the 2008 crash. Yes, that's right. He was one of the bankers, in very, very young, who basically dumped a load of toxic debt on the Royal Bank of Scotland, which, you know, lit the whole thing off, really. Right. 41 and a half and you feel ancient and poor, thanks. Oh, you think, well, I am. As I say, when I went a few weeks ago, when I went to London, which was like the first time I've ever been to London on my own, because the last time it's probably only my 4th time in London. The other 3 times when I was very young and other people took me. And yeah, I was walking down Whitehall and they've got all the red telephone boxes still for the tourists. And, you know, there's this father with his young lad, and the young boy says, "What's that?" And his dad said, "A telephone box," as if that should explain it to him. And then the kid still said, "What's that?" He couldn't actually get even the concept of a telephone box. I thought, oh dear. I mean, I'm old enough even to remember. Now, you know, if you think about Doctor Who, of course, you know, the most famous telephone box in the world is the TARDIS. Now, police weren't using those when I was growing up, but there was still the odd defunct one about. So the concept was still familiar to me. And now you've got kids, young kids, who you say telephone box to them, they're just like, it's like you've just jammed 2 completely unrelated words together. What do you mean telephone box? You might as well say telephone mayonnaise. What are you talking about? That made me feel old. I don't often feel that old. Finland banned privacy. I knew somewhere had. Was it Finland? And somewhere else as well in Northern Europe. I was aware of that. Top of international education leagues. Yeah, of course, because private schools aren't there for educational excellence. They're there to give your offspring, no matter how stupid they may be, connections in life. They obviously do provide a better standard of education just because, you know, you've got the smaller student to teacher ratio. I mean, I had 2 years of private education in what would now be called year 1 and 2. And before my parents realised it was bloody expensive, and back into state education I went. I say back, I never went in, you know, my first experience of formal education was private education. And, you know, I was so far ahead when I then went to junior school. So far ahead. You learned at such a rate, it was incredible. Literally, when I went to junior school, they had this thing. So they had this bookcase with books on it, and it was like a hierarchy thing, and then the blue stickered books were the hardest books at the top. And I just said, well, I'll read those then. And I took them home and I read them in like 3 weeks. That was it. No more reading for me, apart from my own books at home. The difference was immense. But at the same time, that's not really why it exists. It exists to give your kid the tools to sort of win in life without having to be the best. Sean Locke quote there. I like to stand outside the gates of Eton and work out which snot-nosed piece of shit will be ruining our lives in 20 years' time. Yeah, they need to deal with that. But if there is a way of actually just straight up banning private schools, see, I'm not sure how you do it. But if there is a way to do it, yes, because they don't actually do society any good. I'm not actually opposed to people providing private versions of things, as long as, you know, as long as the state provides a decent quality of all the things we need. If anyone wants to try and offer like a more expensive, fancier version, fine. I'm not opposed to that. What I am opposed to is people paying for an unfair advantage in life. So I wouldn't at all mind if private schools could actually just be kicked in the head. You can remember public phone boxes stinking of urine. Well, I did actually say in my little recap video after the rejoin march that because I couldn't find a working toilet anywhere in the part of London I was in, I wasn't desperate actually, as it happens, but I did actually say I was actually thinking of going back to the telephone boxes because in my day they were used for two things. Old rotary phone would confuse most under 30s. Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I was only just old enough to remember those. That's what I always think. There must be some weird words that are just really weird for people, like when you say dialing the phone. You know, people, I suppose young people now just, do young people even know what it means? Or do they just associate the word with the phone ringing, you know, connecting? Whereas no, you used to have to dial bloody buttons. In fact, you know, even things that were well before my time. When I was at university, I went to Manchester University. I mean, this was the place that had Jodrell Bank and Split the Atom and all the rest of it. You know, top school of physics. But nonetheless, that we didn't get fancy equipment for our lab days. It was all Blue Peter jobs. And there was one investigation we were doing on resonance, and to generate the radio signals we had an old World War II radio, and to get the right frequencies there was like metal, there was a book with metal pages in it with the codes that we had to dial in. This is in the 90s. But anyway, Etonians don't do science. I don't actually know what they study, in all honesty, other than, so that's the other thing as well. So when we're linking it back to bullying, you do have to wonder, because there is, although I will absolutely not deny that there will be bullying goes on across the house, there just seems to be a real perversion about the Conservative Party. And you do have to wonder, is it because so many of them are privately educated men? You know, is it because they all went to these, not just the private school that might exist in any town where you pay your fees and they get a better standard of education. I mean, you know, the posh private schools, the exclusive ones, the ones for the toffs. And you do have to wonder, is it because so many of them were used to being buggered senseless as young boys and they just think that's the way to behave? You know, because there's a real weirdness about Tory. When you hear some of the things, it's like bullying of the kind you've never heard of. Do I think Trump is finished after so many of the nominees worse than average and failed to get elected to Congress or Senate? Trump then refused to do a substantial speech to supporters. I'll tell you what, I don't really know what to think, of course, because US politics is something I have a casual interest in. But I'll tell you what I think. I think that Donald Trump has far too great an ego to bow out of this one gracefully, or even gracelessly. Donald Trump has committed to giving a speech on Tuesday, hasn't he? Where he's fully expected, he was expecting to rise to ride the red wave. Apparently that's a tongue twister now. And announce his candidacy for the next presidential election. It seems quite clear that there's a lot in the Republican Party think he's a spent force, a busted flush. And so they're not happy about that. But at the same time, Donald Trump wants to be president again, doesn't he? And he still has a lot of supporters. You know, the cult of personality is still in place. So I'll tell you what I think. I think we may, and again, I can't know this because I've not got my finger enough on the pulse of American politics. I put it this way, I would not be surprised if it turned out that what we're actually going to have is a civil war in the Republican Party. You know, where, because remember, the Republicans in general didn't want Trump in the first place. He outflanked them because they didn't take him seriously enough. So you would think the ones who don't want him again will now take him much more seriously, but still not want him again. So what you might end up finding is that they are attacking each other more than the Democrats say, excuse me, which will only help the Democrats. TV channels will say tune in next week. What the hell is that? Oh yeah, I suppose that's another one. They don't know about tuning the television. Yes. See, I am also old enough to remember when there was no just changing the channels with preset buttons. You turn the dial until you got to the right frequency. With regard to education, parents need to learn that they are their children's first teachers and begin the academic education before they go to public or private schools. Yes, but at the same time, most parents aren't equipped to do that. They're really not, which is why there is a huge disparity in the quality, effectively, of kids when they first enter formal state education at 5 years old. Oh, I mean, there's so many things that can separate kids in that first year as well. First of all, some of them are basically a year older, because you get someone who's born late August and someone else who's born early September. The one who's born early September is, or very late August. I don't think the cutoff is the end of August, whenever it is. I know I'm a teacher, but I'm not an early years teacher. I never remember when it is. But whenever the cutoff is, you know, you have someone who could be born a day apart, but one of them is the oldest in the year above them and the other one's the youngest in their year. And the one who's the oldest in their year has a year, basically a year on the youngest in that year. And at any time, a year's an advantage. But at that age, you know, you've got someone who's nearly 6, and you've got they've been, and that means they've been without education for nearly 6 years. And you've got someone else who's 5 and so on. But if that's nearly 6-year-old has had good quality education from their parents, miles ahead of the one who's had a shitty education from their parents. So, you know, there's all difference between them is immense, and for a lot of them, they're so far behind that you can't catch up. But it is a difficult one to deal with because many parents are not equipped to educate their children. It's a skill. Lots of upgrades to MP this morning. When am I going to let us become peers of the realm? Do we have to ask for Boris for a favour? Yeah, we don't do corruption here. Besides, I am technically... See, I'm always someone who's had a lot of respect for the fact that the House of Lords will contain a number of very useful experts on various fields that they will be assessing. You've obviously got the Law Lords who can provide expert legal advice. You've got captains of industry get become barons and so on. So when they're discussing like how things will affect business, you've got people there. You'll also have people who've been senior in unions to discuss. So you do get a lot of experts in the Lords, but it is now just wrecked. The whole reputation of the House is wrecked. So, I mean, my preference for a couple of years now has been have it split into 2 parts. So I've got no problem with unelected Lords as long as they've come from some background that gives them some expertise. But I would rather they weren't appointed by politicians, like have guilds. So union leaders, you know, have each, you know, someone representing the unions in there. You have your Law Lords in there still. You know, so the Royal College of Nurses every 10 years or whatever puts someone in. The British Medical Association, basically guilds, groups, professional groups that represent parts of the economy, parts of society, every 10 years just get to elect someone to the House of Lords. But that those people don't vote. So they are there for their expert testimony when stuff needs scrutiny, but have an elected part of the Lords, and they are the ones who vote. That way it's democratic, but you don't lose out on a certain level of expertise as well. Because although you can argue, although you can have a situation where you can say, well, they can always just get people into committee anyway, you can always invite experts on it. Yes, you can. But you don't necessarily, people who are just elected don't necessarily know anything. So they don't necessarily know how to interpret that expert testimony. Will I do a live stream on general election night? I don't know. It's, I suspect not. Reason being, nothing really happens. Really. Because the polls don't even close till 10. There's usually a big old race. There's like a couple of constituencies that they're really quick because it's not that, you know, it's not that difficult to get all the votes counted. And they'll, what do they, within a couple of hours. But most of them, it's through the night. I'm not doing a stream all through the night, no. So I suspect not, because although it's a momentous event, it's very slow. And you know, it's not even as slow as this. I mean, the American they're still going on. In fact, we're not even going to, one of them is going to go to a re-ballot, isn't it? For the 6th of December. So straight away, I keep watching it to see if there's any final updates. But the thing keeps dragging on. It's not as bad here. We will find out the next day. But, Claire Fox is one good reason to abolish the House of Lords. Do you know what? I don't even think she's the worst case. I do not think she's even the worst case. But anyway, lots of children today go to school adept at using mobile phones. You would think so, wouldn't you? I would, but I am constantly amazed at how poorly teenagers can use smartphones. They seem to be pretty awful. But they're proficient, I suppose, yes. But they can't hold a pen properly. To be fair, I could never hold a pen properly. My handwriting has always been shocking. I mean, I can show you some of it. You can't even see it probably there. But my handwriting, I somewhere, I don't know where it is anymore. I know I've still got it because I've never thrown it away. So back when I was at that private school, when I was 4 years old, so I have an exercise book from when I was about 4 or maybe 5 years old. And the handwriting in it is not a lot worse than it is now. I've always had a problem with teachers like tearing the hair out of my handwriting. In fact, when I started training to be a teacher, so I trained to be a secondary teacher, I did sort of regret it later on, but then I sort of didn't. And I thought to myself, because I was umming and ahhing, what do I want to do? And I went for secondary in the end. But I tell you what worried me about being a primary school teacher, and is I thought the handwriting will probably do it. And what you had to do though is you had to arrange for 2 weeks in a junior school before I started my course proper. So I went to my old junior school. There I was sat in the staff room with quite a few of my old teachers there. It was actually quite unnerving. And but I was in a class one time and they were practicing the letter A. And a teacher started criticising this kid for their A because it wasn't A enough. So I thought, I'm going to have a look at this. So I went over to have a little look at this kid's substandard handiwork, and I looked at it and I thought, that's still a better A than I could do. So I don't think I'd have really made it as a primary school teacher. But I have, yes, I do still write, because I prefer written things like notes. But there we go. Yeah, my handwriting has never been legible. Why have any unelected members of the second house? What other modern country has such a ridiculous constitutional arrangement? Is it ridiculous though if you get expert testimony in there? Because I say they wouldn't vote in my system. They would be there. They'd be able to take part in debate. The important thing is they can take part in the debates. They can get their views known. Because the problem with calling experts for a committee is you're only getting the people who were called by that committee, and there's no one else scrutinising them. Whereas the benefit, I think, of having someone in the Lords there taking part in the debates is everyone who's going to vote is there, not just a committee group. And the committee is always chosen politically as well anyway, so they may or may not be all that suitable. Pen is one of those old-fashioned USB sticks, right? Yeah, no. See, yeah. In my first, even the junior school. See, this is another way. If we're going to be talking our age, we didn't use them, but the tables we had, the desks we had in my junior school, still had inkwells in them. And we knew they were inkwells, and we knew what they were for. We didn't use them then. But we did have to use fountain, not in junior school actually. Actually, when did we get our first fountain pens? We did get fountain pens in junior school, but it wasn't in the first year. I think it was in the third or the fourth year. And in comprehensive school, we were expected to use fountain pens. But in sixth form, we were allowed to use biros. They let us use, I think they decided by the time we're doing our A-levels, you've basically been taught to write. If that's the best you can do, we're not going to improve it with any extra practice, so you can use a biro now. No pens allowed until secondary school. All right. So when I was in junior school, we did. I mean, we used pencils in the first couple of years, but then we did. It was either the third or the fourth year. I can't remember, but I do remember it was in junior school because I remember the headmaster engraving the fountain pens with our initials. So we did start to learn to use fountain pens before we went to comprehensive school. You can't hold a pen properly either, at least not what my parents think is proper. They say I have a fist grip. My handwriting is legible, so I don't care. Yeah, mine's not. I mean, where's a pen? I'd have changed. I did used to have what you would call a fist grip, but now it's, you know, how do I hold it? I'm going to have to practice because I don't even know how to hold it right. I hold it like that, which is probably still not suitable. I don't know. But it's I can read my writing though. It's not illegible. That it's just it's unconventional, shall we say, unconventional handwriting. Because I can read it, I can look at my handwriting from years ago and I know what it says. So it's not that it's scroll, it's just that it's using a script that other people don't understand. Do I remember the books of log tables? Oh yes. And trig tables as well, before scientific calculators were all that common. But scientific calculators were in by the time I did GCSE, so, you know, although we had log tables in the books we used, we didn't have to use them in the exam. When you were at junior school, there was still ink in the inkwells. Oh yeah, there wasn't actually ink. It was actually fairly foolish to let us have them because there was no ink in the inkwells, it meant it was a useful place to stash things. But it was also the old, you know, the lift up lids on the desks as well. They don't do that anymore because again it's a useful place to stash things. But there we go. Anyway, right, in the 60s and 70s we used to get all manner of physical punishments by teachers and masters. Chalk, hardwood rubbers, rugby balls chucked, being grabbed by armory and twisted cat. Yeah, well see, corporal punishment in state schools was outlawed as I was entering it, so to speak, or a few years after. It was still permitted in private schools, I think, for a while after. But the problem is that because I was going into education at round about the time it was being outlawed, there were some teachers, it took them quite a long time to adjust. So we did have a few violent teachers because it took them, yeah, it's not an overnight transition. And even as a teacher, even when I trained to be a teacher, I occasionally saw things I should not have seen. I don't think these days you would. But very early on in my teaching career, there was still the odd teacher who would do a few sly things that they absolutely should not have done. Just turned into teacher talk, yeah. 1981 corporal punishment was outlawed. Yeah, it was round about the time, because I would have been 5. Well, I would turn 5 in 1981. But they still had it in the private school I went to. So it must have still been allowed there for a little while. Nick's saying, Phil, that's how I used to hold it. My dad realised about 7 or 8 years old and made me correct it. Now I hold it properly. Well, you know, I was obviously a very poor learner when it came to holding pens. Maybe my manual skills developed very late on. Or maybe people just gave up on me. I don't know. Right, anyway, let's get the last few. One thing that used to get on my teacher's nerves as a kid was that my writing was, and still mostly printed, my ability to do joined up was very poor. I went the other way around. So I do write joined up. I've always wrote, well, ever since I learnt to write with cursive, I have used it. I had to print, although I don't do it when I write on paper, but I had to print as a teacher. I think any teacher does, it's not just me. But the very first lesson I tried to give as a trainee teacher, I tried to write joined up on the board. This was not happening. No one could read it. Even I struggled, because it's the writing vertically is extra challenging. So I had to print then, and it took me a while. I eventually got reasonably quick at printing, but because my joined up writing is so bad, I also used to transfer that. If I wrote notes on a student's work, I would tend to do that in print as well, unless it was just a quick good or something like that. But if I had to write an actual message that meant something, I would tend to print it. But I can easily switch between the two. So whenever I'm writing for myself, I still do it in cursive. One of our teachers used a training shoe to beat you with, real sadist. Yeah, see, they weren't allowed with that. But as I say, we had the odd one who would throw things. Like, as I say, in a comprehensive school in the first year, in maths, I sat next to a lad who was a little bit insane, really. And occasionally the maths teacher would throw a bit of chalk or a board rubber at him. The problem was she wasn't a very good shot, and occasionally I would have to duck out of the way or catch it in the forehead myself. So corporal punishment was abolished in Scotland the year I left school in 1982. First term after that, 2 boys were suspended for suspending a pupil upside down out the window. You probably weren't supposed to do that anyway, I suspect. The second floor window. Yeah, I don't think you were supposed to really do that. But anyway, we just seem to be going on to educational anecdotes now. So that sounds like a good time to call it. So thank you very much for coming on. I hope you have a good evening, and we'll be back on next Saturday. Until next time, I'll see you later. But remember, Sunday roast tomorrow morning. If you just look on YouTube, just put in Sunday roast and look for the channel, not the videos of Gordon Ramsay telling you how to do a roast. See you later.